Tahir, it's wonderful to be in conversation with you after quite some time actually on Filme Shilmy. I remember we did a telephonic like quite some time back during the pandemic. So
Yeah,
it's been a huge, wonderful, momentous time for you. So huge congratulations firstly on that.
thank you. Thank you so much.
So speaking on that, it literally seems like the Mardani villains are literally on a roll. I mean, Vishal is, exploring a plethora of roles, and so are you. So how would you describe this sort of phase that you're in, where you have an abundance of projects lined up and exploring different types of characters and shades?
I would 2022 really has been like a Tahir Bhasin festival, to be honest. The four releases in the same month. Who has that?
Yeah.
And I just wake up with a lot of gratitude because for people who have followed this journey, it's an overnight success that took 10 years in the making. So I do know that it's taken a series of decisions, of parts of releases to get to this point, and you just feel incredibly motivated and validated as a performer.
Right. Now, I think Yeh Kaali Kaali Ankhein, we need to talk. I mean, what a great series that was. It initially began, I'm not going to lie, initially when I saw the trailer, I was like, I'm not sure. I wasn't really sure how it would pan out. I was kind of giving me a little bit of Mirzapur vibes when I first saw the trailer, but then when I saw the series, I was completely taken aback by what I saw. And it was very interesting because it really deals with very great characters. Even the main hero, what you go through, you take a very questionable route to sort of get to that stage. So how was your experience in terms of exploring such a gray series in that way, where you are playing a character which is good, but yet chooses the bad approach to get the good result that he wants?
Sure, I've always believed, both as an actor and in life, no one's all good and no one's all bad. We're all a little bit of 49-51, and it's really the circumstance within the script or in life that sometimes tips that balance. 2022 is special for me in another way because it's the first time I'm doing these romantic, quote unquote, romantic hero parts, which is something I've grown up on in 90s Bollywood. But what I feel is really special about Yeh Kaali Kaali Ankhein is that although, like you said, it starts off as a down the line drama, there's so much that goes on in the protagonist's life that force him to question his values, his morality, his love, his sense of manhood. And it was dealing with all these incredible themes in an entertaining way that make it one of the most challenging parts that I've ever played.
And I think the fact that, it's interesting because we're seeing like, I love Anchal's performance in that as well, because she almost plays like a femme fatale in a certain way, like the way she uses that promiscuity, and there's a certain darkness that she really beautifully brings on screen. So I guess, how important is it for audiences now to see that gray area, like you just touched on?
The shift has been happening for a couple of years now. I remember critics even calling Walt in Mardani an anti-hero. As out of a part, purely because you were shown his family, you were shown that his mother was involved in the same business, and what happens when Vakil passes away, he breaks down into tears. And I think a lot of it is a sign of the times and the majority of the audience and the kind of content that they are now used to seeing, where those lines are blurring. I wouldn't really label it as villain or hero anymore. It's just more realistic heroes, where your heroes can be flawed and the audience will still root for them. And that's the challenge as an actor, of how do you keep Vikrant likable, relatable, yet vulnerable at the same time. And I think that's where the screenwriting really wins in this one.
Lovely. Yes, very true. And I also find it very fascinating because you also have Looop Lapeta coming up as well very, very soon. And the trailer just dropped recently. Now, in the beginning of your career, where you played the perpetrator behind these dark events happening in life, you were the one causing it, as we saw in Mardani, and now you find yourself in that rabbit hole now. So I like to. It's quite interesting to see this massive distinction happening now with this sort of styles of roles that you're choosing. But surely this isn't by design, right? Like this is. I mean, this isn't by design at all, is it?
A lot of it is. In fact, when you make a debut like Mardani, which did well critically and at the box office. The tendency was for a lot of producers and studios to come to me with similar scripts, where every script was a shade of a quote unquote bad guy. And in Bombay, there's a saying that it's often the things that you refuse that end up making you, not the things that you take on. And so it involved refusing a lot of similar parts and choosing to do more diverse projects that sort of broadened my own acting ability, and also allowed the audience and the studios to see me in a different light. And off the back of decisions like that came a film like Manto with Nawazuddin Siddiqui, Chichore with Nitesh Tiwari, 83. And all of these parts were in fabulous ensembles with some really, really accomplished directors, which allowed me to be seen in different ways and appreciated. And then off the back of that came Yeh Kaali Kaali Ankhein and now Looop Lapeta. So I would say it's a conscious decision to constantly be chasing something different that has led to this point. Of course, there's only a degree to which you can actually control the kind of stuff that you do. And after all, your choices sort of end up making you, choosing you rather than the other way around. But I would like to believe that there was a little bit of me involved in that and a little bit of design in the chaos to get here.
Yeah, chaos is definitely the right way to describe it, man. Like, I think that's the most appropriate way to describe it. But I think Looop Lapeta is the Hindi adaptation of Run Lola Run. So how much of a reference point was that original film for you? Was it a reference point at all? Because every time I've heard a remake and I've spoken with actors about doing that Hindi version, they've often said that they've not seen the original version. Has that been the same with you?
I'd seen the original version back in college, and I remember loving it for just how different the narrative was and how it retold time. But as a reference point for Looop Lapeta, it really wasn't, purely because Looop Lapeta is more of an adaptation than a remake. And Satya as a character, which is who I play in Looop Lapeta, didn't exist in the original. I mean, there was Manny, but the way it's been adapted to an Indian context to amp up the romance and just to give him the kind of edge and quality that he has. He's erratic, he's vulnerable, he's goofy, he's Indian in just a lot of ways. And to me, that is what one of the major differences between Looop Lapeta and the original was. So thematically, I did know of Run Lola, and I had watched it back in college, but I didn't rewatch it to try and do something that the original had done.
Sure. Now, I know an actor is always at the mercy of the script and of the director as well. But like I mentioned, because you are doing roles now, which kind of sees you in a rabbit hole situation, like obviously, I mean, just with the reference of Yeh Kaali Kaali Ankhein and Looop Lapeta for that matter. Have there ever been a time in your life where you found yourself in a very sticky situation and sort of, I guess, needed that motivation to get out of it? Did that experience ever help you or internalize your experience of playing that character?
I remember it being impossible to find a good apartment when I first came to Bombay, because Bombay rentals and real estate is really through the roof. And it's something that every actor goes through, where landlords and building societies want a letter of employment, and as actors, you don't really have one of those. So I remember that being quite a rabbit hole situation, and I remember thinking back in those days that one day I want to do projects in such a way that the landlord is proud to have me, and the building society is proud to have me. And sure enough, now when I walk down the street in the apartment complex where I'm at, they're all very, very eager to claim that this person lives in our building. So I'm sort of glad I was a part of that rabbit hole to give me perspective not only on Satya but also Bombay.
Right. Yes, that's very interesting. And I know I mean, settling in Mumbai is never easy, and it is a very it's quite ruthless, I've heard as well. So I think kudos goes to all you actors there who have really pursued and been persistent in making your dreams come true. So I think that kudos goes to you guys. But I think, when you made your debut in Mardani, I think it was very fascinating because I think it was at that point where in contemporary times, we saw a villain, but yet who was so loved and celebrated in that sense because of their performance. I mean, of course, just a few years before that, we had Vidyut Jammwal in Force as well, who also created that sort of a euphoria amongst the audiences. How challenging is it for an actor to not fall into that stereotype or to continuously be bracketed as a villain. I mean, it just goes back to the question that I asked originally about the whole selection of projects that you've made. So how conscious have you been in making sure that you do not fall into that bracket?
Very conscious, and right from the start. In fact, I was very fortunate that when Mardani was reviewed, and by a majority of critics in the media here, the character was labeled an anti-hero as opposed to as opposed to a villain. And the definition of that would be someone who looks and feels and sounds like the hero, but it's what he does that makes him a villain. So the audience really wasn't sure whether they should like this guy, they should be skeptical of him, and that was great feedback as an actor. And straight after that, for a film like Force 2, because you mentioned Force, I was in the sequel.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
yeah, which was for me an incredible opportunity, because in the sequel they give you a backstory of what went wrong with the antagonist's life in order to make him that. And that for me was a major shift in the narrative, where you don't see, quote unquote, a bad guy just executing an action plan to get back at the world, but you see what went wrong in his life. And so there's a little bit of humanness there. There's a little bit of a little bit of association that the audience has with him. And it's always challenging as an actor to play something that's written a little off center, but to play him in a charming way that it stays with the audience. And I've been very fortunate to get those kind of scripts so far.
Right. And I think it's interesting as well because you've been a part of films like Chichore and 83, wherein it really does celebrate the grit of human spirit, and it really does convey a great underdog story in many ways too, even Chichore for that matter. So I guess, how do such stories inspire you in life in terms of being an underdog and overcoming all hardships in life?
Right. It's funny when I hear that question, because I guess I would be an underdog from an outsider's perception of maybe if the media or a critic was to look at me. But one always comes to Bombay believing you're the hero of your own film. So I've never really sort of been the underdog in that sense. But you're right about a project that you're doing influencing you, because no matter how much you're acting, there is a part of that character or that story that sort of stays with you. And interestingly, there's an intersection between Chichore and 83, because Chichore, Derek loses the race, but they win the tournament. And in 83, Sunil Gavaskar is conflicted and facing his own personal battles and losing at them, but they win the tournament. And so there's that sort of reverse yin and yang taking place, which just sort of goes to show you that it's so much more about what's going on the inside, and winning, being a winner in your own view, rather than allowing society to define what that success means to you.
Yes, absolutely. That is so true. And I think because because of social media and the influence of the digital space nowadays, I feel like everything is judged. Everything almost has an opinion. I would put a picture of an apple and they'll probably say, "Ye apple red zyada kyun hai aur yellow kyun nahi?" It's literally become that judgmental. So how do you deal or cope with such judgments and such opinions, especially as an actor in today's day and age?
It's important to be aware of all the feedback and criticism that's going on there, because audience feedback does count for a lot. But I'm also aware that there are some people who will hate just for the sake of hating. And it's important to block that noise out. I haven't quite figured out how to, but I do try.
Yeah, sometimes the block button actually makes things worse, because I actually feel like लोग खुशियां मनाते हैं जब आप उनको block करते हो, and I'm just like, भाई ये कैसा मतलब त्योहार नहीं है ये. Like, it's actually quite embarrassing if someone blocks you, I feel, especially if they're a public figure. But yes, I think also, I mean, Sunil Gavaskar, I mean, what a cricketing legend, and you played him in 83. So for you, what was the greatest learning for you from doing a film like 83? Because I guess that's your proper first, like, out and out sports film. I mean, of course, Chichore had that sports element to it, but this was actually your first sports film. So what did you learn from his sportsman spirit, actually, and your experience of working on the film?
Sure, a sports film is very different from anything I've worked on before, purely because it's all about the physicality, about being able to, and especially when you're dealing with a subject like cricket and an iconic moment in cricketing history, you have to get the details just right. And so it really was about body language and training like a cricketer and eating like a cricketer and a lot of that. What I learned from Sunil Gavaskar's personal history was, he wasn't someone who had innate, like, born skill. He's someone who worked at it, and he worked at it relentlessly. And for him, it was just practice, practice, practice until the time he reached the pedestal that he's celebrated for. And I got that from a lot of the biographies that have been written about him, about what he was like in school and in college when he was just starting off. And that's something that motivated me. The fact that when people talk about a legend in retrospect, they only remember his high points. And very often people do not remember the kind of work that went into getting there. And that just motivated me into going through the grind of what often goes into getting a great performance.
Absolutely, that is very true as well. And I think it's quite a special year as well, 2022, because not just you have multiple releases, but you've also be celebrating, I think, what, 10 years since you actually made your first screen appearance. Because even though Mardani technically is considered to be that, I think your official film debut in that way.
Yeah.
You made your first screen appearance, I think, Kismet Love Paisa Delhi, I think you made your first screen appearance with. So it's been 10 years, Tahir. And I think the society that we knew back in 2012 is very different to now. What do you feel like you've achieved over the years? And not just in terms of career-wise, but in terms of you as a person, or in terms of growth. What do you feel like you've achieved?
I think I've become calmer as a person. Back in 2012, I wanted everything to happen overnight, and I've sort of learned to respect the process way more than the goals. I also have an appreciation for the important things in life, which is something that the pandemic has taught all of us, which is just being able to be out there and meet with your friends and your family. Just as an actor, I think just become way more stringent in what it is that those choices should be, of like the kind of parts that I want to do. And if 2022 is a sign of anything, I think I feel very validated and almost in a festive sense to have got earned an audience that now looks forward to the stuff that I plan to put out. And it takes an artist a very long time to reach a point where both the media and the audience are texting you to say, hey, when is your next release? And that's a little bit of pressure, but it's motivating to know that that's the sentiment out there.
Absolutely, very well said. But look, I mean, it's not been easy. I mean, I'm not going to use the word struggle because I feel like that word gets thrown around a lot nowadays. So I'm not going to use that word struggle, but I'm going to talk about the quiet periods, Tahir, where, because sometimes, especially when it comes to this industry and this sort of career that we've chosen, there's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of waiting, and there's a sense of sometimes not our expectations not meeting. How have you coped with disappointments and perhaps the quiet periods where work isn't as busy as you might have expected it to be?
Right. There are quite a few questions in that question, but I'll try and sort of dissect them as quickly as possible. I also do not believe that I went through a struggling phase. I went through an aspiring phase. And the distinction between those two terms for me is like a struggle sets you up for, hey, what if it doesn't work out? And I literally did not have that mindset. Like, my mindset was, I'm here to aspire, and I don't care whether this happens in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or in 3 months. I'm here to make sure that it happens. And I honestly now, in hindsight, believe that it's the quiet periods that teach you more than the high points. When you're on a high, like I am at the moment, it's very easy to be happy and to be positive. But what happens? Who are you when none of it's going on? When you have to be in a quiet room and actually rehearse, or read a book about acting, or take an online class. Like, that's when the growth happens. And I'm equally grateful that I went through moments like that, because it makes me appreciate a time like this a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And having the backing of YRF as well, I think it's wonderful, because it is really encouraging. And plus, they back some great talents as well. And I think it's wonderful to, see that and see that sort of growth happen for the company too. But for you as an artist as well, being associated with such a huge film banner. I mean, huge is a very understatement, actually. But how does it sort of, I mean, how encouraging was it for you actually at that point, you know, to sort of be associated with YRF?
That was massive because that they did not sign me on before the release of Mardani. It wasn't like a, hey, come and do your first film with us and you will be our talent. That happened after the response, like, because it just skyrocketed 2 weeks later. And of course, as an actor, you hope and pray that your work gets noticed and it does well. But when you get that kind of response, it's overwhelming, and it's a great cushion and a huge compliment that an organization like YRF takes notice of you, because I can rest assured that the same team that guides decisions for Ranveer or Ayushman are also helping me with my work. And that's a comforting thought to know. And in a place like Bombay, what you really need help with is for people to set you up with the correct production houses, with the right teams, because you might be very talented or a great dancer or a good looker or whatever one of those categories you fit in, or all of them.
Definitely, I agree. Yeah, 100%.
But it's really important what project you're working in and how that project is mounted, and so that's what they help with, really.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. But on a final note, I think we're all very greedy now to see more of you. And because you've displayed such a great, such a great premise, rather, through the work that you've done already. What can we look forward to from you in terms of future projects? I believe you've got is it Bulbul Tarang that you've got coming up as well?
No, Looop Lapeta is coming up at the moment. Bulbul Tarang, because of Omicron and the pandemic, hasn't gone on floor yet. But what I can promise you is that the way I function, because you were talking about social media and competition earlier, is my only competition is myself. Like, what I want to do is better than what I did last year. And so that is what fuels me, is how do I do something different and a little better than who I was in 2020. So I can promise you that you will be surprised and entertained at the same time. But in the same sentence, I'd like to appeal to you to say that good things take time. And so it's really slightly concerning that the day the series premieres on Netflix, Yeh Kaali Kaali Ankhein, my inbox already has 500 messages of when is season 2. So that's kind of worrying, because to write a good season and to shoot it takes a while. And so I would urge people for patience and also thank them for their excitement.
That's a very good sign. Let me tell you, honestly, it's a very good sign, and I'm genuinely really pleased to see that response. And I think you definitely deserve it, Tahir, because it's not easy for an actor to make their presence felt and to really display their craft to the audiences, and you've done both superbly well. And I think it's very inspirational, I think, to many young and upcoming actors who are watching this interview. So I'm really glad.
Thanks a lot, Anuj. I really credit a lot of it to the maturity of the audience, and the audience is matured by the way the media speaks about entertainment today. So it's organizations like yours that help us get our work out there and make sure that it's seen by the right people. So thank you.
Oh, always a pleasure, Tahir, always a pleasure. But look, Tahir, it's always so lovely to chat with you. And I'm very, very glad to see this great phase coming up. And I'm sure it's only going to get better as time goes by. And wishing you all the very best for Looop Lapeta also.
Thank you, Anuj.
Thank you very much, Tahir. Thank you.
Bye.